Welcome to Off the Record with me, Sanny Ntayombya. Every Friday, I bring a brand new perspective to the week's old headlines. So sit back, relax, and let's get that conversation going. But before we do, make sure you hit that follow button. And now, let's get into the very first headline.
There have been two types of reactions on social media to President Paul Kagame's overwhelming victory on Monday. The first has been joy from almost exclusively Rwandans, but also some friends of Rwanda. The second reaction, from mainly foreigners though, has been one of disbelief, suspicion, and downright hostility. Joining the usual suspects like Michaela Wrong and Philip Regens have been Ugandans, Kenyans, and South Africans. This group, of course, was joined by the usual anti-RPF contingent. Here I'm talking about people like Placide Kayumba and a person I like to call a media mercenary for hire, Samuel Baker Biansi. Putting aside, though, the usual anti-Kagame group, because we cannot fix them, I'd like to speak to the foreigners who don't already have preconceived notions about Rwandans and their president. I'd like to help them understand how a leader can receive over 99% of the vote. To comprehend the choices that Rwandans have made at the polls, it's necessary to understand where Rwanda is today in relation to its past. When the Belgians left in 1962, they left Rwandans with annual incomes as low as $68. Today, Rwandans' annual incomes average slightly over $1,000. It's not great, but the progress is obvious. Life expectancy has risen to over 70 years. 83% of Rwandans can read and write. 91% of women give birth in health centers, and 77% of homes have access to electricity. In addition, children receive 9 years basic education, and farmers like myself access subsidized fertilizers. Paul Kagame and the ruling party, the RPF, are universally acknowledged by Rwandans as the architects of this progress. More importantly than those statistics, however, President Kagame and the RPF have managed to articulate a vision of a developed Rwanda with world-class infrastructure, high standards of living, and a welfare state that cares for its most vulnerable. Rwandans have fallen in love with that vision, that RPF, that Paul Kagame vision. Let me be clear though, Rwanda's prosperity and unity has been a long thing coming. Rwandans, and here I'm talking about our past, Rwandans have been exiled by past regimes that did little to improve national unity and development. They've seen governments that were characterized by discrimination, corruption, and general, backwardness. And most tragically, they've suffered through a genocide that killed over 1 million innocent people. Thankfully, the RPF defeated that genocidal government in 1994 and got to work rebuilding the nation. By 2003, when the first post-genocide election took place, Rwanda's economy had grown by almost 3 times when compared to 1994, but more importantly, Rwandans had started slowly learning how to live together. A grateful nation voted for President Kagame, who won that particular election, beating, if I'm not mistaken, Faustin Twagiramungu. He beat him by 95%, 95.05%. And interestingly enough, Paul Kagame then won the subsequent elections in 2010 and 2017 with even higher margins. That is not normal, but there's a reason behind it. While some foreign observers acknowledge the development that President Kagame has brought, they doubt his popularity and criticize the exclusion of certain Western media darlings in the elections that have just taken place. Here, I'm talking about people like failed priest Thomas Nahimana. I'm talking about Victoire Ingabire. I'm talking about Diane Rwigara. To those critics, I ask, why should our electoral system treat these people differently? I mean, let's look at, for example, Victoire Ingabire, a known criminal who's only tasting freedom because she was pardoned by the president. Our election laws state that people who have been sentenced to jail terms over 6 months cannot stand for president, which makes a lot of sense. I mean, we're not the US, so we cannot allow criminals to rule us. I'd be more forgiving if maybe she had been sentenced for fighting in a bar. But in fact, she was sentenced to 8 years for not only trying to cause an uprising, but also denying the genocide. The way Western media centers Victoire Ingabire, you'd think that she was the only person denied a chance to go up against Paul Kagame. But she wasn't. 6 other candidates, including Fred Barafinda and Diane Rwigara, were all denied the chance because they couldn't organize their paperwork correctly. But let's be honest here. Even if all of them had run, President Kagame and the RPF would have spanked them. So dear Africans, don't fall into the trap of the cynicism and pessimism about African politics that Westerners want you to have. Understand that through Monday's elections, Rwandans have rejected 2 dominant narratives. The first dominant narrative about Africans states that African leaders cannot deliver for their people. And the second dominant narrative states that anyone who stays in power or staying in power for a long time is always a bad thing. We've proved that that is not the case. So, 3 weeks ago, I said on this very podcast that the most interesting presidential contest wasn't actually between Paul Kagame and his 2 challengers, but rather the contest between Frank Habineza of the Democratic Green Party of Rwanda and Philip Mpayimana, an independent candidate. This time, though, unlike in 2017, Frank Habineza won the battle for second, getting slightly over 16,000 more votes than Mpayimana. I find a lot of comfort in these numbers. In no world should a well-known, fully registered political party with structures all over the country be defeated by a barely known independent candidate. So when Mpayimana won last time, I couldn't help but wonder whether the anti-Kagame electorate had decided to reject Habineza because of his personal background and not because of his policies. The reason I say this is because years after liberation in 1994, there continued to be some kind of weird sectarianism based off of where one lived before the RPF took over power. That's where divisive words like Abasope and Umujepe and Umudubai and Umugande came from. I suspect that these very divisions revealed themselves when we went to the polls in 2017. I suspect that Habineza suffered rejection from the anti-Kagame lobby that year simply because he was seen as a Mugande, someone born in Uganda. They did not reject him because of his policies. I believe that they rejected him because of where he came from. I say this because he had all the credentials to be the right candidate for the anti-Kagame lobby. But Mpayimana, someone without his CV or political organization, came literally out of the blue and beat him. The fact that Habineza won this time is proof to me that some of the old sectarian instincts are not as prevalent as they once were. It seems to me that fewer and fewer people suffer from the poison of ethnic supremacy, and that is extremely good news. Now, on the topic of good news and elections, I've been thinking about what would have happened if Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump had died as a result of an assassin's bullet. I suspect that it would have resulted in something akin to a civil war in the United States. I mean, already there's a large section of Americans who believe that the US government is out to get them. And what makes that section of Americans scary is the fact that they are all armed to the teeth. I can say with a lot of certainty that this group would have gone up in arms if Trump had died. The two events, the assassination and the insurrection, would have sent global stock markets tumbling and led to an increase of petroleum prices. And with America's eye off the ball, further Israeli actions in the Middle East would have probably ensured. The Russians would have probably advanced further into Ukraine, and the instability around the Horn of Africa would have increased. Furthermore, this crisis would have probably encouraged the BRICS countries, here I'm talking about Brazil, Russia, India, and China, to accelerate what they call de-dollarization, the process of where countries reduce their reliance on the US dollar as the global currency of trade. So, would the US have allowed that to happen without a fight? I suspect not. I believe that with, for example, let me throw in a scenario. With American weapons and US naval support, I have a funny feeling that Taiwan would have been encouraged to formally declare independence from China. All in order to get a likely Chinese reaction. All of this would have likely created a Chinese military reaction that would have set the entire continent of Asia on fire. All these events would have likely set Rwanda's economy so backwards. So when I watched that bullet whiz past Trump's head, all I could think was just how close we'd come to a global crisis. Thank God the assassin missed, because as Rwandans, we know what can actually happen when a political crisis combines with access to weapons and stark divisions in a country. We have the genocide. What would have happened in the US? It would have been a tragedy. And that's a wrap for this week's episode. Thank you so much for making it to the very end. Remember to follow us on our social media, and make sure to check out our other podcast, The Long Form with Sanny Ntayombya. It comes out every Monday like clockwork. Hope to have you back next Friday. Have a great weekend.